So here we are again in Saarbrücken.
Yes.
The Englishman and the man from Hawaii. This time we're not in the garden. I don't know why, but life's like that.
Yes.
Now, Nassim, you gave us a very, very interesting talk yesterday, which to me personally was absolutely fascinating, because what you were actually telling us from the point of view of a physicist, a scientist, is that what the Buddhists have been preaching for, a very long time, is actually true. That each atom is actually in itself a small world with living beings on it, and these living beings are made of atoms which have small worlds on it, etc., etc., etc.
Turtles all the way down.
Yeah, the question is, does it just keep going, or does it come back on itself at some point?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that there is a feedback. But the feedback is not necessarily a linear feedback. Like, it's a dynamic feedback in which every scale is feeding back to all the other scale. So at any point in the fractal division, you can find a feedback up to all the other scale. And that's because the space between each scale is not empty, it's full of this electromagnetic field we call the vacuum energy. It's called as well zero-point energy in quantum theory and so on. The ancient civilizations had all kinds of names for them, for it. It was like from mana to chi to various, eventually in later times it was called ether, and then ether theory was abandoned.
Yeah.
And but the vacuum energy was discovered in quantum theory and so on. And what I'm saying is that all these things are actually the same, and they're the same entity. It's this energy in the vacuum, in the space. And if people have a hard time thinking of energy in the space, just think of electromagnetic waves that are flying between you and I right now, and all the radio waves and everything. And if you don't have a radio tuned to these frequencies, you don't know they're there. Well, imagine an energy that's fluctuating much, much faster than any of these electromagnetic waves. We would have no idea they're there, and we have very little ways to measure it. Actually, the Casimir effect is probably one of the most known ways to measure it.
Casimir effect?
The Casimir effect is in 1947, a scientist called Casimir calculated how far two plates would have to be in order to eliminate the long wavelengths of the fluctuations of the vacuum. And like that, they would have a difference in between the plate and outside the plate, and so the plates should get pushed together.
Yeah.
But when he made the calculation, the plates had to be, microns apart. And in 1947, they couldn't mill plates with micron precision, and certainly couldn't get, all the conditions right to get two plates together that close. Eventually, I think in early 90s, late 80s, finally we had the technology to do the test. And when it was done, the result were what Casimir had calculated. Now we have another test that's called the dynamic Casimir effect, where the plates are kind of virtual plates, more electronically produced. And the result is they're able to extract photons from the vacuum itself. And so we know that this energy is there, and it's real. And so what I was saying is that if this energy is in between all the scales, then all the scales are communicating with all the other scales through the structure of the vacuum. Imagine it a little bit like a superfluid, and imagine that you have one scale that's like a boundary,
Mhm.
and imagine that it's oscillating,
Yeah.
then the superfluid around it is oscillating with it, or is getting the information, and so another scale would oscillate with it as well, and and that's how the holographic structure is generated.
Ah, that's very interesting. Now, before we go into another topic, the other aspect of the Buddhist teachings is that the expansion of the universe is God breathing in, and at some point she will finish breathing in and will breathe out again. And this is the red shift and the blue shift.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's definitely congruent with standard Big Bang theories, and I think it's actually correct. However, I think that God is breathing in and out everywhere. That everything is constantly breathing in and out, and we see it in the cycles of nature everywhere. We see it in the movement, the dynamic of stars with the supernovas and so on, the dynamic of galaxies as well. And I think it's like a continuous cycle of breathing in and breathing out. And so I think the Buddhists didn't have it in just the context of one event of breathing in and breathing out, but in a continuous fashion. And I think that's what's kind of missing in the Big Bang. It's like more like a continuous creation model.
Yeah, the reason I asked this is because you mentioned yesterday we have this effect in the universe of the red shift and the blue shift happening sort of simultaneously in the same area.
That's right. You get this torus shape, where things are moving away from the center at the equator and coming back towards the center at the poles. And I think that because we're so puny, I don't know if you saw those slides yesterday where I was showing like the scales of different objects in the universe, and how like our planet looks like a little teeny grain of sand beside the sun, and then the sun looks like a little teeny grain of sand beside Arcturus, and and then stars relative to galaxies and so on. So I think that like there's this dynamic that we see that in which all these structures are constantly going through cycles where they are expanding out energy and collapsing information towards their center again, and then expanding out energy, going through this constant cycle of creation.
So we have this fascinating situation where things which were, so I say, points of faith for, several thousand of years, and then poo-pooed by 19th and early 20th century scientists, are now being proved to be, well, at least relatively correct.
Right. Well, it's remarkable how many of the ancient traditions in many different cultures around the world actually mesh very nicely with modern discoveries and things that we're just learning about today, that we're getting from new equipment and satellite and better resolution and telescope and so on. And all of a sudden we're discovering a cosmology that resemble many of the ancient civilizations around the world, and certainly the Buddhist cosmology.
Wonderful. Now, I don't know whether you've had the opportunity to use any of the transmissions which I've loaded into the quantum field, the healing transmissions. Have you?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay. Well, it's on karmasingh.tv. The reason I mention this is that I would like to hear your point of view as a scientist on how this works. But what I actually do is I record a healing transmission into a video camera, I load this onto YouTube,
Mhm.
and then I publish the video, and anyone can access this healing energy simply by watching the video. How does that work?
Well, that I have to think about that. It's very interesting. There's many variables there. It's hard to tell. And certainly you got to make sure you can eliminate the placebo effect.
Yeah.
There is lots of evidence that the quantum field, or actually this vacuum energy, has a holographic dynamic, holographic base to it. And if you can access that holographic structure and imprint information in it, then I see no reason why you couldn't have a very powerful positive effect if you're embedding healing information or supportive or information to life.
Well, it certainly seems to work anyway. The feedback is positive in enormous volume, and placebo effect. Interesting, whilst you mentioned that, I just want to mention here exactly what the placebo effect is, because the pharmaceutical conglomerates spend over 400 million a year to convince people that it in some way proves that non-medical methods don't work. The placebo effect is actually proof that pharmaceutical medicine doesn't work.
Right. It definitely, I don't know if it proves that the pharmaceutical approach doesn't work, but it certainly does not prove that alternative to standard medical procedures don't work. It actually proves that there's something very powerful about the human mind and the human consciousness that can totally heal the body from very dramatic illness just by believing that they can be healed. And I think that the placebo effect should be studied, not discarded as some kind of anomaly that is almost something like, I believe it was like something like 30% of the cases can be considered placebo.
Well, what we get is you have a typical so-called double-blind study with a pharmaceutical.
Right.
You get three groups. You get the group that are actually given the medicine, you get the group that are told they're given the medicine but are given a sugar pill, and the group that are given nothing at all.
Yeah.
And the healing results for the first two groups are usually absolutely identical. So it's not the medicine, it's the belief in the medicine. So it's the belief, not the chemical. As borne out in homeopathy, it's the information, not the chemical carrier, that brings the birth.
That makes the difference.
Yeah.
And that's, very congruent with the theories I'm writing that's showing that, as you were mentioning earlier, that like every point has all the information in it, and that like the universe is based on a holographic structure, and that obviously if you're with your consciousness able to change the information that is in the holographic structure in your local frame of reference, then you're basically able to change fundamental ways that your body is working and so on, and the placebo effect is really evidence that actually can be done just by your beliefs.
Yeah, well, this is what a healer does. He does it, or she does it for you, and you feel the effect. Or if you meditate, you get the same effect. You change the way you think about something, and you change the effect of that thought.
Yeah, and I think that if we were to try to identify exactly what is the compound, or what is the link that makes that possible, I think that if we were to try to identify what is the molecule in the body that carries the information or that imprints the information on the structure of the vacuum, I would say it's the water molecule.
So would I.
And that's why all of life emerges from water, that water carries the structure of the information of the holographic field through the material world. And you know, the experiments that were done and popularized by Dr. Montagnier, that shows that DNA can transfer its information into pure water, and then he just injected, you know, the sugars to make the base pairs, and all of a sudden the DNA appears in the water. I think is very, very telling about the importance of the water structure in the information carrying compound for the DNA and for all the functionalities of, you know, the bio structure.
This is something with which we experienced, I don't know, several thousands of times now with the Harmony technology. You purify the informational structure of the body water, and you get an enormous spectrum of, I say healing effects, but healing implies that something has been done extra to create this effect. Not all that's happened is that the body water has become so much more coherent, and every action in the body is based upon water. Even the digestion and the metabolic activity in the cells is all water-based.
Right.
And if you get high-quality water, you get a better quality function than you do if you got low-quality water.
That's right. And, you know, it just makes sense. With the body 70-some% water, the brain is 90-some% water. You know, if the water quality in your body is poor, you know, the structure of the body and the way the cells can communicate and everything starts to degrade. But if the structure of the water is highly coherent, you know, there should be very good communication between cells, very high level of health. You look at the water, for instance, in placentas, a newborn baby, it's highly structured. When you look at the water in the healthy cell, it's highly structured. And so I think that it's critical, and I don't think we pay enough attention, certainly in the Western world, at the importance of the water molecule in the metabolic structure of the body.
Yeah, this is what Emoto has been preaching for the last, I don't know, 40 years or so, and it's certainly borne out by every experiment I've ever done.
Right, right.
Anyway, something else you showed us yesterday is a machine to neutralize gravity, the basis of a, well, is it a spaceship or is it a teleportation device or what is it?
You know, it's experiments I'm doing with plasma in order to recreate the fundamental dynamics we see in, you know, suns and stars and galaxies and quasars and so on in a laboratory, to reproduce the natural dynamics of the structure of space-time in a controlled environment in a laboratory. And I'm hoping that as a result, it'll produce gravitational effects and that control over gravity. And I think it's a critical time in our history where we need to understand how gravity works truly and be able to control it so that we can kind of get out of the nest that carried us through till now and actually learn to fly, really learn to fly. And you know, even Stephen Hawking in the last few years have been talking about the fact that we need to learn to live off the surface of our planet. Planetary surfaces are not stable place. Eventually, you know, a comet or a large meteorite or a big sun flare wipes out planets. And so any civilization that survived past our level of evolution is probably a civilization that learned to control gravity and that no longer lives on the surface of their planet.
Okay, so when do you think I'll be able to order my spaceship? I'm not surprised.
It might take a few years still. You know, I think that there is a lot of researchers that are, you know, approaching rapidly this kind of capacity. Obviously, it's going to take a long time. You know, when the Wright brothers flew the first plane, it's not like everybody...
They didn't.
Well, okay.
The short did it in Kent, nearly 20 years before.
All right, okay. Whenever we started to have planes, it's not like we had jumbo planes, you know, the next week after. So, and still to this day, it's uncommon for people to own their own plane. So, you know, it might take a while before we all have spaceships. But I think humanity is getting to that point where we're getting very, very close to understanding the fundamental dynamics of gravity. And yesterday I demonstrated new equations that describe gravity in a very much different way than Einstein did. Although it meets what Einstein did at the Planck's distance, it shows that gravity is more like a pixel of the structure of space-time, interacting with the surfaces of event horizons than the typical picture of curvature. But as soon as we start, which is quantum gravity, it's a discrete gravity, but I think we're getting really close to understanding the fundamental dynamics of gravity and learning to control it. And as soon as we do, it's gonna change our world dramatically.
I had some correspondence with a professor at Nottingham University, must be at least 15 years ago. He developed a technology with which he could actually float a frog in the air. So I wrote a book, it's very exciting. When is it going to be big enough to float a car? And he said, well, the frog is the upper limit to get enough energy to float anything bigger than that.
Right. He was levitating the frog with magnetic fields.
No, he developed some way of neutralizing gravity.
Oh, okay. Using a lot of energy.
Using a lot of energy.
Yes. Well, you know, there is new energy technologies that are emerging in which we're realizing that the structure of space-time itself, the vacuum, has a lot of energy in it already. And when we tap into it, you know, there's going to be a lot of energy available in a very small amount of space. You know, the energy of the vacuum is calculated in quantum theory, quantum field theory, at 10 to the 93 grams per centimeter cube. So it's huge. That's like 38 to 39 orders of magnitude larger than the mass of the universe in a centimeter cube of space.
Let me just put this into kitchen physics. This thing that you've just quoted, there's enough energy in one point in space to supply the world with electricity for the next 10 million years at least.
Yes, absolutely. If it was all extracted, you know, with 100% efficiency. But even if we could extract a very, very, very teeny, weeny little bit amount of it, it'd still be a lot of energy. And I think that, you know, the approach to use energy to produce gravity, to cancel gravity, is, you know, it's the start, except that instead of trying to use the energy in a certain kind of brute approach, maybe we can learn to control or to, how you say, direct the energy that's already present in the vacuum itself to produce an anti-gravitic effect.
The picture that I get when you say that is that we have energy sitting in the vacuum in its still form, relatively still, silicacy.
Right, you could say it's like incoherent, like water molecules in water.
If, however, we can set up specific flows within the field, then we can create a flow which goes under another flow and push the other flow upwards.
Yeah, exactly, something similar to that. I tend to think of it as, because of the equations I wrote, as a spinning field. You know, so imagine you're in a pool and the water molecules are kind of like randomly going around, and then in that pool, all of a sudden you start, you know, a vortex.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you put a little thing in the middle of that vortex, it's gonna tend to go up or down depending on how your thing is relating to the vortex. And so, you know, we can hopefully create this kind of vorticity in the structure of space-time in such a way that it counters the vorticity that our planet produces, for instance, or the suns produce. And so then you're repelling. So imagine that the planet produces a vorticity in a certain direction, and you're producing the opposite vorticity. Obviously, you're going to lift instead of getting sucked down. And so it's something like that I visualize.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, all I can do is wish you Godspeed and let me know next week how far you can fly.
Right. Well, you know, like I said, I think there's many researchers that are getting there, and it's on its way. It's not there yet, but I'm really hopeful, and I think it's going to have a really amazing contribution as well to energy and to health and so on. Because I think these vortices are created. This coherency in the vacuum is created by our body as well, and so it's...
Well, just to mention this, the way in which your cells create new proteins is by the use of a vortex, of a short-term vortex.
Right. When you look at the DNA structure, you can think of it as a little antenna of the vacuum structure and so on. So it's all in there. We're working on it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, that was pretty good.
Right on.